and Sean, who's here to help facilitate, has posted the Accountable Space guidelines in the chat. So just a very quick introduction. My name's Edward Ware. I'm head of news here at Mind. Over the years in previous roles as a former journalist and in my work at other organisations, I've done somewhere in the region of 100 sort of broadcast interviews, including national interviews on places like Sky and BBC and Radio 4 and the World Service. I've run media training sessions at three national charities, including with chief exec. So hopefully this is something I know a little bit about. I'm just gonna kick off with what I think hopefully will just get a smile, put people in the mood with what I think is the greatest interview of all time. There we go. Just the greatest interview of all time. That puts a smile on my face every time. I think every aspect of it is perfect. The little girl's dance, all the way through to the desperate lunge at the end to close the door. Just wonderful. We'll cover some of the stuff that has gone wrong there later in the presentation. But also just to reassure you, there's only a couple of incidents like that. So this will hopefully prepare you. This will ensure stuff like that never happens. But even if the worst happens, you'll be remembered for eternity for a little humorous moment. Just so what we'll cover today is we're going to cover why we do broadcast media interviews, the different formats. Oh, can people hear me? Right. It might just be you, Sarah. Right, okay, I'm going to crack on. It looks like attendees can hear me, so fingers crossed it's just you, Sarah. We're going to cover why we do broadcast interviews, the different formats, how to prepare, some interview technique, and some of the hints, tips, and key lessons. This hopefully is for anyone who hasn't done media interviews, and hopefully it will give you that kind of the grounding in some of the sort of fundamentals. And hopefully, even if you have done some media interviews, you've got a bit of experience, hopefully this will give you maybe a bit more of the theory, give you some more thoughts, some more techniques, some more ideas that will help you make those interviews that you do as effective as possible. Just to say that this session's probably not going to take the full 90 minutes. It's a little different to a sort of normal media training session that I would run where we'd be doing lots of kind of like practical work and getting people to do practice interviews. But that's not something that's sort of practical in that session. But that is something I would recommend is if you are someone who's going to be doing interviews regularly, you can maybe take these materials and do that practice, because it's like any skill. In my experience, doing a lot of training on this kind of thing, is some people are kind of like instinctively better. Some people require a lot of practice, but like any skill, the more you practice, the better you will get. Great. I've got a few videos as well. So Sean is here to help, but I'm going to keep an eye on the chat. Do feel free. There's going to be a couple of moments where I ask people for their sort of thoughts and ideas on some of the videos that we've seen. I'm keen for this to be as sort of as conversational as possible. So do feel free to put your hand up, put questions in the chat. I'll try and keep an eye on the chat. Sean is also here to help, so she'll flag any questions that I miss. But yeah, so do feel free to sort of come in at any time. I got a couple of icebreakers. but I guess first off, it would just be great if people could put in the chat. If people are comfortable coming off mute, please do. Maybe just give a little explanation as to why you're here, whether you're someone who does interviews or whether you're someone who works in a comms team who is going to be the person setting up the interviews and what you're hoping to get out of the session. Right, Heather. Do I need to take Sean, do we need to take people off? No?
Oh, hi. Hi.
Oh, great.
Hi, folks. I'm Heather. I am a National Mind employee. Apologies, a housemate in the background, just to run in the same way as the video we started with. I am here not basically for anything mind related specifically, but I run a local like LGBT plus society, and I literally this week was asked to give a comment on some of the EHRC changes by a local journalist, and I thought, well, this lines up pretty well for me. So yeah, that's my motivation.
Thank you. Okay, well, yeah, if people are writing in the chat, do feel free to post in the chat. Oh, that's great. So we've got local mind leads. Yeah, well, hopefully and I'm happy to share the slides, and I'm always happy to have a chat with people afterwards. Do feel free to drop me a sort of an email. It's a bit of a pet subject of mine, so always happy to have a conversation. Oh, Lauren, do you want to come in?
Hiya. I've just turned my camera off because I'm just eating breakfast, if that's okay.
No
I'll put it
worries.
back on when I start
No worries.
eating. But I just wanted to say I'm from Bradford Mind, and I'm the communications officer. And I thought this would be a really good session because next week I'm interviewing the Bradford City football team for Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. So I thought it would be good to get some tips and tricks. So yeah, that's why I'm here.
Right. And Sarah, yeah, always good to help broaden your horizons. I think sometimes, like, yeah, taking different tips from different disciplines might just prompt some thoughts about how we do things. Yeah, I guess so. My sort of first formal icebreaker is, again, like, do feel free to put it in the chat. Do feel free to put your hand up. My question is, do you remember an interview you heard on TV or radio? And I say not podcast specifically because they're tend to be a bit longer form, so it probably sticks in the mind a bit more readily. So do you remember one you heard from last week? And I guess my question, and the second question is, how easy was it to recall that, and what do you remember about it? This is the first time I've used this icebreaker in this session. I've been meaning to do it for a while, so hopefully it proves my point and doesn't backfire on me. So I'll give people a couple of minutes.
I'll go just because I'm still on.
Yeah, great, go for it.
I don't remember, especially not from last week. I think definitely longer if I was to think last year or whatever, I'll find something, but I just don't think it's a type of media that I readily consume anymore, especially not TV. Like, I don't think I've turned on-demand TV ever, but it's just not something, yeah, and I don't listen to the radio. So yeah, interesting.
Thank you for sort of proving my point.
Yeah.
Yes, that is lowbrow, and I've only caught the social media clips, Nancy. One of which nearly did end up in here because someone else was using it as a good example of media training. But yeah, I guess the one of the points I'm sort of trying to make here is that if you are someone who does interviews or you're involved in people doing interviews, it's very easy to over self-analyze and worry about absolutely everything that you did to a minuscule degree. But I guess what I'm trying to prove to that is, unless it's really, really memorable, people aren't going to remember. So it kind of proves that it's really difficult to do this well and to really cut through and to really stay in people's minds. But also, it's just a point about remembering how people, I think this is a really important thing to remember, is how people engage with media. If you're listening to the radio, I don't know about you, I'll do it when I'm in the kitchen when I'm getting my kids dinner or breakfast together. So I'm kind of half listening and I'm half tuning in. I had a great conversation with an editor from the Today program a few years ago. He made the point that lots of people can almost set their morning routines by the Today program, and I didn't even realize that that was something I did. I knew that my walk to work, I had to be at a certain set of traffic lights by the time the sort of near 8 o'clock weather came on, and that would tell me that I was sort of on track to be on the right time. So yes, people are listening and engaging, but they are also doing other things. So again, like, if you want to really cut through, you've got to sort of land your message in a really effective way. But equally, it's just to try not to worry about it too much. I know it can feel, if it's not something you do regularly, it can feel really overwhelming and it can feel like a really pressurized situation. But you are thinking, like a lot of things, you are thinking about it infinitely more than anyone else is. So thank you for that. Again, just going to ask people their opinions on the following. This is an interview that Rachel Reeves gave back in June. I think it's just ahead of the spending, just after the spending review or just before. I think it's a really interesting case study. I think she's really someone interesting to look at from a kind of media training point of view. But it's just a very short minute clip. And again, if people are comfortable coming off mic or people just want to put initial thoughts in the chat, I'm just going to play it. And my question to you is how do you think she did? Cool. So yeah, I mean, it isn't a great location for sound. I think that one lies on the BBC. That's with the BBC. Although her comms team probably should have done a better job in making sure they had a location. I don't know the context. I'm going to assume that they were on location where they were trying to talk about investment. But yeah, oh yeah, sorry. I can't see everyone's names. Person who has their hand up, Emily. Your name
Hello.
It's just swung into view.
I think overall it was quite long and rambly. Like I would struggle to kind of say now what she was saying, but there were a few points where she kind of came up with like 3 examples at a time, and then really kind of I don't know how to say it, but kind of reduced it down to an area of focus. So at one point she said, I as Chancellor, which sort of refocused the conversation. And then she said, and that's what this is all about. And then kind of reduced it to a digest. So overall long and rambly, but there were attempts in there to kind of, create a digest.
Yeah, I think that's a really good take. I've got a few more thoughts that I'll come to in a second. But yeah, does anyone else have any thoughts on how that went and what they kind of took away? No worries if not. I'll give you my thoughts, and if you do want to put your hand up or stick anything in the chat, please feel free. I think that this is for me this is a really interesting case study, and I think where media training can often lead you, which is, I think she's doing a lot of the theory okay, which is, she obviously has some key messages that she wants to deliver. She wants to push back on the GDP figures. She wants to then relate it to, quote unquote, working families and ordinary working people. I guess some of it is like, it doesn't feel to me like it actually resonates with people's lives. I think there is like a big emotional disconnect. I think it feels quite staid. And there's a few points that I think are relevant to that, which is, who's the audience? This is BBC Breakfast. This is people getting up in the morning. To my point earlier, this is people having it on in the background when they get their kids together. I don't know that too many people, from my experience speaking to producers, are sitting down and watching 2 hours of breakfast TV. They're watching a little bit, they'll be picking bits up, they'll be getting their kids ready, they'll be getting to go to work, whatever it is that they might be doing. So she could do a much better job of relating this and making it relevant for the people who are watching, rather than just sort of referring generically to sort of quote unquote working people. I think often stats can be important, but I think sometimes they can just be incredibly dry and they don't mean anything to people's lives. I don't know what a 0.7 increase in GDP means to my life. It doesn't connect with me on any way. So as I said, I think you'll see as we come to some of the later slides, I think you'll see that she's trying to land her key messages, and in some ways she is doing that, but I just don't think that there's a great deal of authenticity. I don't think there's a great emotional connection, and I don't think her and her team have done a good enough job like making it relevant for the specific audience of that program and that format. And I've got a bit of a bee in my bonnet because I think this is a problem that Rachel Reeves has. Although saying that, I did see her in a sort of roundtable format with people, and she talked about the challenges of being Chancellor, of childcare, and the balance of that, and balancing childcare and childcare cost. And that really landed with the people she was talking to. It was like, so you can do it and you can see how it works, but you've just got to make that connection with the audience. And this is probably a little bit unfair, but so my next slide, which is, yeah. I'm going to credit another media training provider for this one, but I think it's a good one. Just to remember, sometimes as much about the words you say, it's about how you make people feel. And I don't know about anyone else. That Rachel Reeves interview just felt a bit dry to me, especially when you're trying to talk about, people's financial well-being and stability. Yeah, I agree that exactly. So I think she is, yeah, she clearly is. She's got the messaging. I just don't think it's being done in the most effective way. And we'll come on to an example which I think is a really good example of how to do it from sort of fairly recently. So why do we do broadcast interviews? Because it's a really effective way to land a message with an audience. You can have lots of different reasons for it. It might be that you are trying to raise awareness of services. It may be that you're just doing it for brand awareness purposes. It could be a lot of the work that I do in the news team is, we're specifically trying to land messages with politicians and policymakers or regulators. It can be to challenge stigma. And then in some cases, it is about, it might be that you're in a position where you need to do some reputation management, defend your organization's reputation, or some crisis communications management. And I think it's worth saying that is crisis comms and that kind of thing is a session all on its own. But the principles that we'll talk about and the planning the planning processes that you can go through do apply in those situations. But I think particularly when it comes to reputation and crisis management, that is something that the skill is in the practicing, and you really have to sort of, to the greatest extent you can, sort of hone that, because getting it wrong carries sort of so much greater risk. So interviews, like, what are the formats? There's sort of three main ones, which is live. So that will be in the studio. There's different formats for that. You could be, if you watch one of the sort of news channels. It could be, you could just be in studio with the presenter. It might be like a morning show where you're on the sofa. You could be on location like Rachel Reeves is in that situation. Or it could be that you're doing it what's called down the line. Most of the time these days that will be on Zoom or a kind of like video platform. I think you still get it a little bit, certainly used to in the olden days pre-COVID. You would go into a studio with a little camera and do that interview down the line. But because the sort of video quality and audio quality on things like Zoom is so good now, that's sort of fading away. Pre-recorded interviews. So this is predominantly, the pre-recorded interview is going to be where they are looking for a kind of soundbite clip that they can drop into a package. And so that is a skill in itself, is delivering that 10 to 15 seconds that when the journalists are sitting in their editing suite and putting the package together, that they can go, that's a great clip, really punchy thing. We can just drop that in at a certain point and that'll make sense. And then we kind of move on. So we'll talk a bit more about that down the line. And then there is, I mean, this is predominantly what podcasts are. You get it a little bit with sort of traditional broadcast interviews, which is recorded as live. It's not that common, but this is where, if for whatever reason they wanted to do a live interview, you can't make the logistics work. They'll do an interview, record it as it were live, and then just drop it into the program. If anyone listens to the Today program, they'll often do that with interviewers that they've had to do with people overseas. You'll hear them say, I spoke earlier to this person, and then they'll drop it into the package. That's because, the person in America, it would be 3 o'clock in the morning when they're doing the interview. So they'll record it and then drop it into the program. And sometimes in this country, like sometimes you'll get it where you've got weekend news programs and they're doing a sort of featurey bit, and people don't want to be doing interviews on their weekend. So you can sometimes convince a producer, let's record it as live and then you can drop it in. But generally, interviews for programs, they'll want you live, or if it's for that package, it'll be that sort of 30-second pre-record clip. And so this is just an example. Hopefully what I said was clear, but this is an example of our Associate Director for Policy and Campaigns, Minesh. This is the little clip from him. So yeah, hopefully that's just a really clear example. I haven't timed that, but I think that's somewhere in the region of 10 seconds. We did that because we wanted to talk about the 10-year plan and how we didn't think that we were concerned about mental health not being sort of sufficiently prioritized and there not being sort of sufficient funding. And I think Minesh did a really great job in that of just nailing that soundbite. So again, it does what the producers want. They wanted to talk about the 10-year plan in the context of those changes that the government had announced. So yeah, so we'll talk about it a little bit more in a second. But when you are doing that pre-recorded interview, it's really important to have in your mind that little sort of refrain that you can come back to and think like, that is the thing that I'm going to land. That is the really clear, succinct sentence, couple of sentences that's going to sort of hopefully land the message that you want to. Yeah. On to the really, oh, Sarah, come in, please do. I can't hear you.
How about now?
I can hear you now.
Yay. It's a good job I'm not in charge of anything technical today, isn't it? I was just thinking on that refrain thing, it's like a really interesting point. But like, you know, sometimes when the politicians do debates with each other and stuff, and they clearly take the refrain thing a little bit too far, and it doesn't matter what the question is, they just say the same thing over and over again because they've been told to keep repeating themselves. How do you get the balance right between it being enough but not too much?
It's a really good question, and I don't think there is a specific answer to. I think you've got to make that judgment in the moment. I think particularly in an interview, like there's a difference. So in that pre-recorded instance, like you can go there. I've had situations where you go and there is that little message that you want to land. You've also got to be aware that the journalist has the package that they're trying to produce and the soundbite that they want to get. So I have had situations where it sort of almost ended up, it's been a bit awkward and almost ended up with a little bit of a standoff with the producer asking the question in different ways and the spokesperson sort of landing that message. And I've had to have a conversation with our spokesperson to say, look, this wasn't at mine, this was in a previous role, that, you know, we've got to also meet their needs. So we've got to answer the question a little bit and then get back to our frame. I think in those live interviews, that is sort of on the politician to make sure that they're just not overdoing it. Because I think one thing that's important to realize, I think as a general rule, audiences have quite a good, you'll excuse the expression, like I think audiences have got quite a good bullshit detector, and they will become aware of that. I think that, and then I think there's a difference where politicians are trying to land a message with a wider audience, and so some people who are more politically engaged will be watching lots of interviews and it will get boring for them, but they're not the people that politicians are trying to speak to. They don't care if it gets boring for people who are listening to the day programme and then The World at One and then watching the news channel. They're doing it for the people who are only listening to one of those and only half listening to it. So, and I'm going to assume that there is a certain amount of research that says that that is an effective way to do it, to drill that message. But it's a kind of slightly subjective thing as to how you balance that. But I think for us, if you are a spokesperson doing something for a Mind or a local Mind, they're not going to be too worried about that. They want to do a good package on whether it's an event that you're hosting or whether it's a report that you've got out. They want to do a good package on that. They're not out to get you. They want you to deliver the message, but they also just want to get the package. They want to get a good package for their viewers as well. But thank you. It's a really interesting question. Yeah, this is the really important bit, but it's also the really boring bit. If you are preparing for an interview, there are like absolutely key elements that you have to have. Make sure you prepare a really good briefing. And I think these are the key elements of it. Background, you just want to understand, like, you know, if it's a report you've got out, you just want to know the context, some of the coverage that's been around it, some of the sort of public discussions. The next bits are the really important bit. You need to have a really clear objective, like, why is it that you're doing this interview? What is it that you want to get out? Is it that you want to drive people to services? Is it that you want people to take action, whether it's a fundraising action or a kind of campaigner action? Like, you are doing this for a reason, so be really intentional about that before you go into an interview, and that should inform your key messages. Generally, you probably want around 3. You don't want to be going in there with too many, because it will just become overwhelming. You'll get confused about what you're trying to land. So just around 3 key messages is about right, and those key messages, you're kind of like, they are your guiding stars for your interview. They are what you want to try and be bringing your answers back to. Always, interviewers want to ask questions and they want to get answers to their questions. So there is a skill, and we'll talk about one of them in a minute, is try and answer the question to start with, and then bring it back to the messages that you want to land. And we talked about it a little bit there. When you're doing those pre-records, having that soundbite is really crucial. So you know that you've kind of almost got those words in your head, that when the right question comes up, you can deliver that, and hopefully that's what appears in the package. You want to have some key facts. You want to have some stories. People might be familiar with the key elements of persuasion, which is what, in slightly like Ponzi terms, it's logos, pathos, ethos, which is like the sort of factual basis of it. Have you got the facts to back up your argument and make a good case? Have you got the sort of emotional stuff? And often that will come from sort of media volunteer stories or first person stories, maybe service users, media volunteers, and then there's what you call the ethos, which is the credibility. Like, why are you a credible voice on this? Hopefully, as a local mind, you can talk about, how long you've existed, the number of people you helped, the services that you deliver. That is your credibility. And if you remember at the start of this session, I talked about the number of interviews I'd done, the training that I'd done. That was my attempt to sort of try and establish my credibility as a sort of expert on this subject. So when you are doing those interviews, think about those three elements of it: your facts, your emotional bit, and then sort of why you're the credible voice. Always have a think about the expected questions. Again, we'll come on to the types of questions that you can get. But whether you're the person doing the interview and maybe you're speaking to the producer beforehand, or you're the comms person who's setting up this interview and having those conversations with the producer, try and get a sense. They don't have any duty to tell you what they want to ask, but in general, they'll give you a sort of rough outline of the types of things that they want to ask. So you can generally have a sort of barely decent sense of where the questions are going to be. But then you also need to think about whether there's any sort of challenging questions that they might ask you. As I said, we'll come on to the specifics a little bit, but always be prepared. You don't want a spokesperson to be kind of caught on the hop and trying to improvise the answer to a challenging question. And then I think particularly for organizations like Mind or Local Minds, make sure you've got the useful info that you need. Do you have, you'll often get asked at the end of a session, do you have, where can people get help? So you want to have the website, any helpline numbers like ready to hand, so that you can have those on. There's nothing worse than someone going, oh, just go to the website. Make sure you've got that information to hand. So I just touched on it, the questions. There are a few types of questions that you'll sort of generally get. So there's your kind of opener, which is, just basically tell us about your thing. Is it an event? Is it your research? You'll get that sort of just open-ended question where you get the chance to kind of set out your stall. That's a chance to land sort of one or two of your key messages sort of straight out the gate. You'll often get, particularly, as I said, in my world, in that sort of policy influencing space, you'll get that, what do you want to happen? What changes do you want to see? Again, it's a really good chance to nail your question. They want to know how people, like, stories need to have that human impact. They need that pathos. So you want to have, be prepared with those stories, as I said, whether it's something you've experienced, whether someone you've supported, or people that the service that you work on has supported. And then there's what I and a former colleague refer to as the but surely question, which is the sort of I used to work, one of the organisations I used to work for was Step Change, the debt advice charity, and we always used to refer to it as the big telly question, and you would get it like pretty much at the end of every interview about debt and financial security. Is like, wow, people have got massive tellies, aren't they just spending all their money on stupid stuff? So that was our but surely question pretty much every time. Then you might get, if you're responding to something, you might get just like, what's your reaction to? If you're reacting to like a news story or local events, then that's another type of question you'll get. And then there's another one, which is be aware of things that might be sort of related to the interview that you are giving, whether it might be an external news story. For us, it might be some sort of recent changes on, if we might be sort of doing a story on a report that we've got, but it might be that there are some changes in the benefits world that have been announced in the sort of previous couple of days that are relevant. They will often ask you for an opinion on that at the end. So it's just being aware of those questions that are not directly related, but it would make sense for an interviewer to ask. And unfortunately, that's also a space where they can come back to things like past controversies. Or if it's particularly with local radio, it might be that it's a discussion topic that they've had running that you're being interviewed on, and they might sort of put listener questions to you. So again, just be thinking about what those types of questions might be. Onto the interview itself, I think, again, alongside the briefing, these are the key things that I would want people to take away, which is be authentic. I've mentioned it. I think audiences have a very finely tuned bullshit detector and they can spot it. And I think this is one of my reasons why I don't think that Rachel Reeves one is a really great example. Be confident. There is a communications principle. I can't remember what's, it's like the 735, 55 about the amount of communication that is non-verbal. So be confident. People can hear it in your voice. They can see it in your body language. And that really does inform the way that people receive information. Be prepared. We've talked about having that really clear briefing, doing preparation, doing practice sessions. If you've got the chance to do it, just a few run through questions for someone pretending to be a journalist, it's really helpful. Positive body language. There is some people in media training tell you not to do gestures. That's not something I necessarily agree with. I think if you naturally talk with your hands, do it, but just be aware of where to the level it might become a distraction. If it's something you naturally do, I think that's fine. I think people can sense what is natural and what is not. Speak plainly. Don't use acronyms. Try and make your audience feel well informed. Yeah, and I think this is on a future slide, Heather. Like, particularly if it's a pre-record, don't be afraid to ask the producer or the presenter questions about how things look. Like, they want things to look good as much as you want things to look good. So don't be afraid when things are being set up. Don't be afraid to ask questions, and stay calm. And that's particularly important if, for whatever reason, that line of questioning goes down a kind of challenging route. The duty is on you to be the one that stays calm and professional, and use some of the techniques that we'll talk about in a second. But just to go back to that top point, being authentic, and a little bit about my previous point on the Rachel Reeves interview about understanding the audience that you're dealing with and like adjusting your tone and adjusting your content to the audience. This is an interview by the now, I think, don't know whether he's been sworn in yet, Mayor-elect of New York, Zohran Mamdani, on, it's like a YouTube thing called Subway Takes. But I think he is an excellent media performer, and I think it's that authenticity and adjusting and his ability to kind of like adjust to the relevant audience. So this is, yeah, this for me is just a really good example of authentic interview technique. Yeah, I agree, Heather. I think got so many good responses to those questions. Yeah, does anyone, yeah, just sort of put it out. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Like whether they feel like there's a sort of material difference between that and the Rachel Reeves. They're, as I said, they're two very different formats. I accept that, so it's maybe not a fair comparison. Yeah, exactly, Sarah. Like he's trying to nail that early voting message. That's one that he gets in right at the end. I think he's able to flip around the questions, the critiques of him very well. To me, it feels authentic. I'm aware that some politicians are very skilled at being authentic, so maybe I've bought that, but that's a skill in itself. So I want to say Lauren. Yes, Lauren.
Hey, yeah, I might be a little biased because I'm part American, so I'm very, very proud of Zoran. But I think he's a really great example of being able to he gets peppered with a lot of misinformation, and what he's really able to do is kind of switch it back to what people really care about, and it speaks to, your authenticity and what Sarah said above about like being one of us. And I thought that's the biggest thing, is you got to connect with your audience and just switch it back to like what they care about, and that's what they're going to take away from what you're saying because they care about it. I saw another video of his which I just thought was really, it's like quick responses where he was riding a bike through New York and someone yelled at him communist, and he was like, no, it's pronounced cyclist. And I just thought that was just like really, it's those good hard-hitted like really quick responses that just like stick in your mind. I think it's really brilliant. His campaign is just chef's kiss.
Yeah, I think he's one who is, it's obviously like social media native and like, but is really skilled in using it in a way that I don't think a lot of people have kind of got their heads around yet.
And I think that brings it back to like that one of us. And I think that's why he's had the biggest, voter turnout, is because people recognize a little bit of themselves, and especially he's got that younger voter demographic because people see themselves, he's relatable, he's meme worthy, he's not afraid of, being in social media, being on Subway, like where is Trump doing that, So
yeah, I don't know. It feels, I'm not an American, but I feel like when he says working in middle Americans, like that resonates more with me than Rachel Reeves saying ordinary working people. It's essentially the same message. I just think it lands very differently. Great. This is just another example. People may well remember this, but it's just an absolute car crash. This is why you prepare for challenging questions. So this is, just to give you the context, this is the boss of Persimmon Homes. I can't remember the exact figures, but he'd been awarded a bonus, I think, like in the tens of millions, possibly even like 100 million somewhere, absolutely astronomical. He's giving an interview on like them building homes. And then, so this is just a small clip of that interview. That's good. I can see some people wincing on screen, which is good. Yeah. The notion, I find it incredible that his team thought that he would get the chance to just put his message out there, talk about how Persimmon Homes and the work they're doing in the local area, and not get a question about what was a major news story and whether that's appropriate. It's a failure on so many levels, but also it's the point that he has made that worse. Millions more people will have seen that clip than had he given an answer where he'd been able to kind of what you call bridge away, which is something we'll come on to in a second. could have just said, you know, it's up for the board to determine my bonus. Persimmon's making X millions in profit, blah blah blah, and just move on. Like, it's still not a great answer. I'm not sure anyone should be getting out. Well, it's not. We're not here to talk about economics, but £100 million bonus seems excessive to me. Yeah, exactly. It is unfortunate that he didn't answer the question, and that's just, yeah, it's bad. It's bad preparation. It's badly handled in the moment. Yeah, but that's why you prepare for the challenging question. So he should have known it was coming. He should have had an answer. And you don't get to just walk away in that instant, because it will get shown, and it's right for the journalist to share that. So one of the, as well as the preparation, one of the, like, the sort of main technique that people talk about in media training is what you call bridging, and that is just the ability to, which is something that Sauron does in those videos really well, is to take the first part of the question, potentially answer it, or use a phrase, and then bridge to where you want to get to. And it's going to be context dependent, it's going to be question dependent, but sometimes it's worth it if you think you're going to be in that position of just having some phrases that you think might just help you get you back there. So, like, it's important to remember, or, like, you know, I understand that concern, but actually this is the reality of what we're seeing. Like, we've learned from that. This is what we're doing now. These are the changes we're making. You know, sometimes you'll get invited to speculate on something. You don't want to do that. Sometimes it's just right for you to say, hey, do you know what, this is not something for us to answer. That's up for whoever to decide. But what we can say is X, Y, Z, that we need more funding. We need these types of targets for mental health, whatever it is. It just gives you that ability to answer the question and not seem evasive. That's the thing, is that is the real skill, is making it feel like you've sufficiently answered the question and then getting to where you want to without just evading it, and giving the interviewer the opportunity to just keep coming back and pushing you on something that you don't want to necessarily get pushed on. So I'm going to use Minesh again, and just yeah, I'll just play this and then we can talk it through. So yeah, so I'm sure many people are aware, like, the sort of benefit bill, particularly with disability, is growing very quickly, but we don't want to have to concede that space on that cuts are definitely necessary. And I think Minesh does a really skillful job of not accepting the frame of the question, but giving a good answer on accepting that maybe there do need to be reforms to the benefit system, but not accepting the frame of the question and then moving straight into our key message. So yeah, I think that's, for me, that's just a really good example of someone from Mind bridging on what's, you know, is a challenging topic, and particularly that was sort of at the height of the sort of benefits discussions back in the summer. Before I move on, because we're sort of close to wrapping up, yeah, any sort of thoughts or questions on that sort of bridging technique, that example? Oh, all good. So yeah, then just onto some practical tips to remember. Yeah, it can come down to the skill of the individual. What I would say, Emily, is my experience of this is I think I made this point at the start. I think some people some people are just naturally a bit better at it, but it is a skill that can be learned. I worked with someone in a previous organization who we did their media training, and we would not let them go on interviews because it was clear that they weren't able to do it. But we did a lot of practice with them, and then after that, with that sort of more intensive practice, because they needed to be doing it for their role, it actually turned out to be a really effective spokesperson. So it's just maybe just overcoming some of those initial challenges, sort of that just a bit of that repetition and that way of thinking and that way of sort of forming the words as you forming those sentences and having those messages and the format of the briefing. So it definitely can be done, but it definitely is something that requires work. So yeah, just some practical stuff when you're delivering those interviews. When you're live and on location, look at the presenter. Again, be conscious of your body language, have that positive body language. Talked about it earlier. Don't be afraid to ask questions before things are being set up. Yeah, they want a good shot. You want a good shot. Ask them about the lighting, ask them about the way you stand, ask them where they want your eye line. Generally, it's going to be sort of looking at the presenter. When you're doing those live down the line ones, if you're doing it on Zoom, look at the camera or just below it. Make sure you've got a good setup. Check your background. I haven't included a link. There's a very famous recent one. If you Google BBC Wales interview top shelf, you'll realise why you should check your background, and that is top shelf, both meanings of top shelf. So if you are of a sensitive disposition, don't do that, but it is very, very funny what someone left on their shelf. Pre-records, it's not a habit you want to get into, but it is very easy, and I've done it plenty of times in pre-recorded interviews. Just put it into Google Images. You can ask to do it again. Sometimes it's very easy, particularly with pre-records. You're sort of thinking as you're speaking, and sometimes your brain just loses the thread, and you're like, blah. And you can ask to do it again, because again, they want a good interview, you want a good interview. As I said, it's not a habit you want to get into, but if you're really not happy with it, just say, do you mind if we do that again? And most producers are going to be absolutely fine with it. And then a few things to think about, just sort of general hints and tips. Check your background, make sure you're lit from the front, not the back, otherwise you'll look all sort of weird and shadowy. Producers should go through this stuff with you, but make sure your background is tidy, it's not too busy, neutral. Some books, some art, etc. is fine. Plain walls make you look like you're being held captive. So just make sure it's good lighting, lit from the front. If you've got a ring light, use it. Make sure you can't be interrupted, as per the very famous clip I showed you at the front. Check your tech, make sure you know that you've got a good internet connection. Be aware that the mic is always on, and increasingly for radio, the camera is as well. So the image here is that's Sarah doing an interview on the Today programme on Radio 4, but increasingly the video feed gets clipped up and used on the socials. So make sure you know with your producer if that's something that's going to happen, because otherwise that then informs how much sort of concern you need to give to your background. Make sure your clothing, if on TV, don't have stripes or strong pattern. Stripes will give off like a strobing effect. Don't wear green, because if you do something stupid, people can then like green screen your shirt and project stupid things onto you. But make sure you're comfortable. So just generally, like, block colors, comfortable, smart is what you want. Where you can, listen into the show beforehand to get a sense of, to get a feel of the show, get a sense of is it lighthearted? Is it serious? Like, what kind of questions is the presenter asking? And that was something I think I maybe skipped over a bit earlier. Make sure you understand the presenter's style. like listen to a few of their interviews. You know, a lot of stuff will be, a lot of local radio in my experience can be quite softball stuff, but equally some of the toughest interviews I ever did were local radio because they had a bit more time. Sometimes they were just sort of naturally a bit more combative. Thanks, Samuel. So yeah, so make sure you understand and that you're prepared for that presenter and their style, because they are all different. And you know, and again, if it might be that the interview that you're doing is on a subject they've been doing a phone in on, so if you can listen in for 20 minutes, half an hour, because it might be that they've got like listeners texting in or phoning in, and so if you're able to use a story that someone's used on the show before, all the better. And then make sure you've got some water so your throat doesn't go dry, and you don't get all croaky. And that's it. As I said, hopefully that will give you, it's a bit of a grounding on some of the techniques, some of the sort of hints and tips, but also that key kind of preparation and making sure that you know how interviews work, you know the types of questions, and you make sure you've got a really kind of clear objective, you've got your key messages, you know exactly what you're trying to do and why you're doing that interview. Yeah, so I think we have got a little bit of time. As I said, we were definitely not going to take up the full 90 session, but yeah, if anyone's got any questions or any other thoughts, please let me know. I can see Sarah typing, so I'm going to let. That's just a thank you. Great. Well, if there's no more questions, thanks everyone for your time. Thank you for your contributions. Happy to share these slides, as I said, and if anyone ever wants to kind of reach out and have a chat, always happy to do that. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.